So I think it's good we start with Surah Al-Fatiha. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. صدق الله. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعن الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So this is the third part in our series discussing supplication or dua and also the supplicant as well as the etiquette of supplication. And of course the primary source material for this is the book by Ibn Fahd al-Hilli titled Uddat al-Da'i wa Najah al-Sa'i, the provision of the supplicant and the triumph of the seeker. Like I say at the beginning of all of these sessions, it's strongly recommended that previous parts are listened to, watched, read before we continue with this one, so as to avoid any confusion within this subject matter, because the nature of the subject matter, the style of discussion, requires that each part build upon the one that came before and the ones that came before. So I would strongly recommend that the reader, the listener, the watcher, go through the previous parts prior to going through this one. But we'll still have a small recap, so if I can get a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد عجل.
So in the previous session of the series, we laid the groundwork for understanding supplication or dua, not just as a mere act of asking, but as a sacred form of intimate conversation with the divine. Drawing on the Quran and traditions of Prophet Muhammad and his family, we began to slowly uncover the profound depth of supplication as a central pillar of not just Islamic spirituality, but of Islam as a whole. We explored how the word dua itself is a very difficult word to give a simple translation to, as it extends far beyond prayer or request or anything like this, and encompasses love, longing, complaint, remembrance, and surrender. And through the verse of Quran from Surah al-Ghafir, the 40th chapter of Quran, verse number 60, Surah al-Ghafir is the chapter of the forgiver. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that your Lord has said, call me and I will answer you. Indeed, those who refuse to worship me will enter hell in utter humiliation. So we reflected on this open invitation from God, a divine mercy that allows us to turn to him at any time, in any state, with any need or with no need at all. We discussed how supplication, dua, is not limited to times when someone feels desperate or hopeless or in difficulty, but it's a constant dialogue. It's like a daily act of spiritual nourishment. And it's the soul reaching towards its actual origin. It is worship in and of itself. And as Imam Sadiq, the sixth Imam of the Muslims, narrates from the Prophet, and Imam Sadiq says, the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, had said, indeed, supplication, that is dua, is worship. And that is available in the compendium known as al-kafi, and the references in the write-up. But in fact, dua or supplication is the essence of worship, and it's the most powerful weapon that the believer has. A weapon that is strong against both external forces of corruption, but also with the internal battle that is with the carnal self. Through various Quranic verses and narrations, we began to see that dua can change, or supplication can change, even the most firmly decreed fates. It can repel what has been destined and unlock doors that seem forever closed. It is the act that brings light into the darkness and proximity to the beloved. It is the legacy of prophets, the means of salvation for entire nations, as in the story of the people of Jonah or Prophet Yunus. and it's the secret path to God's mercy and to nearness to him. We also reflected on how dua should arise and come out from a purified heart and a sincere soul. It's not just a practice, it is a lifeline. It is a love letter, a ballad, a whispered longing beneath the throne. As we continue this journey in the coming sessions, we will explore further dimensions of supplication of dua, its conditions, its etiquettes, the secrets of answered and unanswered prayers, the role of remembrance, the beauty of God's names, and the transformative power of sincere calling, as well as salutations to the awliya of God. So with his permission, with his guidance, we now move forward, seeking not just to learn about dua, but to live it. Please give me a salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل.
So as we've learned in the previous session, the act of supplicating is something profoundly powerful. And indeed, it is a core component in the life of the believer. However, in the world we live in, with all of the noise, the consumerism, things like Netflix and iPhone and this, that, and the other, the need for people to sometimes hold down multiple jobs to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table, that feeling that we're always busy and never have enough time, there is a difficulty that people find when it comes to calling to God. In reality, this should not be the case, as it's extremely straightforward. As I've said before, it doesn't necessarily require any sort of formality. It can be done in an entirely informal manner, as and when required, from any place. After all, as per the verse of Quran from Surah al-Ghafir that I mentioned earlier, the chapter of the forgiver, and indeed that we discussed in the previous session, God tells us explicitly and without condition that we should call him and that he will respond. We also know that when God says something, he's not saying it lightly, nor is he saying it as a passing statement. Whatever God says should be taken as a given, that he means it. This means that if God is saying to us that we should call him and that he will respond, then it is clear and without doubt or ambiguity that he will respond should we call him. But now comes a question: how to encourage both ourselves and others to call to God, be it in the formal manner or be it in the informal manner. This is what we're going to try and understand, and indeed, God willing, inshallah, implement and apply within ourselves through the course of this session. In the name of the Lord, who listens to all who call upon him, let us too call upon him. But more importantly, let us hear him, proceed in his direction and in his way. Let us shout, Labbaik, yani, I am here, O Lord, and move resolutely toward him. Please give me a salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل.
So every sane person's intellect requires that they keep themselves and their loved ones away from losses as much as is possible. However, as everyone is well aware living in this world, it is not without its trials and tribulations, and it is not devoid of anxiety, afflictions, or indeed losses and tragedies. Unfortunately, and we pray to God that he protect all from any difficulties, we know that a person may well be afflicted by, for example, diseases from within, tyranny from without, difficulties with their work or family or loved ones, and annoyances by their neighbors or others. Indeed, if none of these afflictions or problems occur at this time, there is every possibility that they will in the future. After all, in the Quran, in Surah Ankabut, the chapter of the spider, God says very clearly in verses 2 and 3, the 29th chapter of Quran, verses 2 and 3. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, do the people suppose that they will be let off because they say we have faith and they will not be tested? Certainly we tested those who were before them, so God shall surely ascertain those who are truthful, and he shall surely ascertain the liars. So the test from God will always be there in all manner of different ways. More so, how can afflictions not occur when this world is replete with them? when it's in a constant state of change, and that none are actually immune from them. The difference is merely that hardships have afflicted some people now, and no doubt will afflict others in the future. More so, a hardship can be something that is not overtly visible, that is not necessarily overtly visible. It could be the breaking of a heart, an affliction of the soul. It could be something entirely intangible. And of course, it could be something tangible. In this world that we live in, we see tragically that many, many people are afflicted with blights such as depression and other horrible psychological ailments. Many of these which leave no obvious mark on the surface, but can shatter the heart and soul into tiny pieces, leaving a person broken and entirely bereft, not to mention the damage it does to their family and loved ones. Whatever the case, and however the ailment, the human intellect accepts its existence, and indeed the necessity of removing these type of afflictions. And it is in this condition that supplication or dua can be a means of removing and indeed curing such ailments and afflictions. After all, in Dua Kumail, we say, Ya man ismuhu dawa, O he whose name is a cure. And this is also something that we can garner from a saying of Amir al-Mu'mineen from Nahj Balagha, and the reference is in the write-up. Imam Ali says, the person who is afflicted with hardship is not in greater need of supplicating, yani dua, than the one who has been spared an affliction, but is not immune from it. Now we can infer from this tradition, this teaching of Imam Ali, that every individual is in need of calling God, of supplicating. This is irrespective of whether such a person is afflicted or not, rich, poor, whoever they are. The difference is that the afflicted one is in need of supplication for removing the affliction, whereas the one without affliction needs to supplicate in order to ensure that any future affliction or afflictions are kept at bay. After all, every sane person needs to ensure that they have taken precautions to protect themselves and their loved ones from any problems. And as we've learned in the previous session, supplication or dua is the weapon of the believer, as stated by Prophet Muhammad himself, where Imam as-Sadiq quotes from Prophet Muhammad saying that supplication or dua is the weapon of the believer, the pillar of religion, and the light of the heavens and the earth. And the reference for this again is in the write-up. Therefore, any person, given the nature of this temporal existence, and given that anyone with honor will want to protect themselves and their loved ones from any difficulties or problems, and indeed be armed in order to come to their defense should the worst happen, given all of this, any sane person, any person who wishes to ensure his or her own safety, the safety of his family and loved ones, even at times when there is no issue, no problem, they would still take precautions and take action to ensure problems are repelled even before they arrive. This is an intellectual understanding of the need for supplication, the need for a believer to supplicate. Of course, there is also the entire notion of love, something that we discussed right at the beginning of our series on the Lantern of the Path. And love factors into this equation quite significantly, since we have previously discussed that worshipping God is in fact to love him. And as we have said previously also, the lover always wants to communicate with his beloved. Dua or supplication and its related disciplines and activities such as prayer, such as munajat or whispered prayers, such as salutations to Prophet Muhammad and his family, ziyarah, such as remembrance or zikr and more, are simply a means to communicate with God. Indeed, even intellectually, it is entirely valid that the lover wishes to speak, to remain in constant communication with his beloved, more so when his beloved is the entire source of his existence and actually holds his entire life in his hands. There is another hadith from Imam as-Sadiq, again, this is found in al-kafi and the references in the write-up, where Imam as-Sadiq says, indeed, supplication and affliction Dua and bala wrestle each other until the day of judgment. Verily, supplication repels affliction, even if it has been firmly decreed. Now, this indicates to us that supplicating is an extremely useful and powerful tool that God Almighty has placed at our disposal. Not just placed, but in fact, He has insisted that we use this tool. Because as in the verse from Surah Al-Ghafir, the second part of it says that those who are too arrogant to worship me, they will be dragged into hell in a state where they are humiliated. And we discussed this in the previous session. Therefore, from an intellectual perspective and from any other perspective, it makes perfect sense that one should supplicate, that one should always be in communication with God, should talk to, should call out to God at every instance. Since this is what dua, this is what supplication is, then intellectually we can agree that the supplicant, from a rational and sane point of view, should always be in a state of constant communication with God. And again, we say this in Dua Kumail, حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. That make it so all of my activities, my litanies, my works, everything is combined into a single stream of worship. My entire existence becomes just a movement of worship to you. In truth, supplication is not merely a reaction to hardship. It is a deliberate act of love, of reason, and of spiritual self-preservation, and actually temporal self-preservation, anchoring the soul in trust and proximity to its creator. And for the believer, it is a path to closeness with the one who is the most beloved and who holds all things. Please give me a salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Now, the question that needs to be asked is, how does one encourage him or herself to supplicate? Indeed, before that question, we must first acknowledge that to supplicate, to call upon God, to worship God, is to indeed love God. And what is not to love about God? Without him, we wouldn't exist. Without him, nothing would exist. So we need him. Furthermore, as we've discussed in earlier sessions, especially on Lantern of the Path, we know that the entire purpose of creation is to worship, to love him. In Quran, in Surah Dariyat, the chapter of the scattering winds, 51st chapter of Quran, verse 56, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, I did not create the jinn and the humans except to worship me. And in fact, in the first session for Lantern of the Path, we explained and we discussed how worship is essentially love. Therefore, it is only logical, and as we've said earlier, it is an entirely rational thing to worship, to love him. Now, when a person loves another, they want to speak with them all the time. They want to share with them their happy moments, their sorrows, their concerns, their everything. Every part of their being, when something happens, they want to go and share it with the one they love. If they were, for example, someone who read a given book, for example, that they found particularly interesting, then they would want to run and tell their beloved about it. If they had a bad day at work, God forbid, someone gave them a hard time or upset them, then they would want to immediately tell their loved one. And this too is a form of supplication to God. God is the one who knows us better. God is the one who knows us better, indeed better than ourselves, better than any other. So it stands to reason that anyone would want to speak to their most beloved who knows them inside out and tell them, complain to them, ask them, just talk to them, and so much more. Indeed, when speaking to God directly, there is actually no need to use a particular language. There's a very famous hadith from Prophet Muhammad, attributed to Prophet Muhammad, which clearly says that even when it comes to reciting the Quran for a non-native Arabic speaker, there is no compulsion to force themselves to read it in Arabic. And the reference for the hadith is from, again, al-kafi, and it reads, Indeed, the non-Arab man from my nation recites the Quran in his own non-Arabic tongue, and the angels raise it up to the heavens despite his accent. So someone can recite the Quran in whatever language they want, and then the effect of reciting the Quran is taken up to the heavens by the angels. This is actually really amazing and a huge manifestation of Allah's mercy. Any person, therefore, regardless of what language they speak or know, they can talk to God, they can call God, they can supplicate and pray to God in any language, and God will listen, understand, and respond. Of course, I need to caveat this by saying that the daily prayers, of course, have to be done in Arabic, and it's good for people to learn to read Arabic, for example, for the Quran. But as Imam as-Sadiq says, in another tradition, again from al-kafi, from the book of prayer in al-kafi, which reads like this. Someone asked about Abdullah, that's Imam as-Sadiq, may we supplicate to God during the obligatory prayer and outside while we are doing tasbih, while we are doing, rosary. To which Imam as-Sadiq replied, and this reply is very interesting. Yes, whatever you supplicate to God with, in this language or any other, it is knowledge, and everything by which you mention or call upon God is part of knowledge. Therefore, for any person, any believer, any person at all who has needs, and there is no human alive who is needless. Some might think they're needless, but this is to their own detriment. And indeed, if they really have no need, they must still have a desire to speak to the one and thank the one who has given them so much. So any sane person who wants to speak to God, however he wishes to, though, and we will discuss this in an upcoming session, there is a protocol that can be followed. And this is for the formalized supplications. And for these formalized supplications, this protocol should be followed. However, for informal conversations with God, the protocol is simply that one is honest, that one is sincere, and comes with a pure heart, that one loves or tries to love that who they are calling upon. And that they accept that the one they're calling knows everything about them. There is no point in trying to lie to God. He knows us better than we know ourselves. And this same approach should be for one who wishes to encourage others to supplicate. And he's someone who wants to encourage other people to supplicate. They should also speak to them in this same fashion to try and give them these points. Please give me a salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
So,
وعجل.
if you consider you have a friend, for example, who, God forbid, is unwell, he's become depressed due to his or her situation. Unfortunately, he's wallowing in self-pity and he acts in a manner that, for example, his life is entirely without purpose or without meaning. Now, you, as an honorable friend, you have a duty to help and support your friend, to help alleviate his pain and his problems. Yet he has become despondent. He has decided that God doesn't love him, nor does God care about him anymore. And he feels that he can't, or worse still, will not supplicate to him, as according to his flawed thinking, he feels this is without purpose. Now, this friend is in dire need of help, of guidance, of love, and of support. There are important reasons for this. Firstly, if this friend is left to his own devices, then this will open up many attack vectors that shaitan and the agents of Taghut will use to destroy this person and move them into the wilayah of Taghut that we've spoken about in our Wednesday sessions on wilayah. And this is the case in both this world and the next. And of course, this would be a disaster. Furthermore, as a believer, we have a duty towards our fellow brother or sister. And this is evidenced and taught in both Quran as well as in the books of Hadith. For example, in Surah Al-Anfal, which is the 8th chapter of the Quran, the chapter of the spoils of war, verse number 72 says, indeed, those who have believed and migrated and waged and struggled with their possessions and persons in the way of God, and those who gave them shelter and help, they are heirs of one another. As for those who have believed but did not migrate, you have no heirdom in relation to them whatsoever until they migrate. This is the important bit. Yet, if they ask your help for the sake of Allah, for the sake of religion, it is incumbent upon you to help them, except against the people with whom you have a treaty. And we, of course, discussed this when we were speaking about the issue of migration in the last session on Wednesday, part 20, I believe. So now, while this verse was revealed in the context of early Muslim migration, the portion of the verse that we are interested in, that we are discussing, is the one that reads, "Yet if they ask your help for the sake of religion, it is incumbent upon you to help them." Now, this segment has been used and understood by many of the righteous Islamic scholars, including Allama Tabatabai, in his excellent Tafsir al-Mizan, as being indicative of a very important principle. Also, Fakhruddin al-Muhaqqiqin, Fakhr al-Muhaqqiqin, who is the son of al-Hilli and a brilliant scholar in his own right, in his discussions on fiqh, in jurisprudential discussions, uses this verse as a basis for the duty of defense and supporting believers who are oppressed or under attack. Indeed, Allama Hilli himself uses this verse as part of his discussion on the subject of defensive jihad. If we go further back in history, we can see that Shaykh al-Tusi, in his Tibyan fi Tafsir al-Quran, which means a clear explanation in the exegesis of the Quran, which is a tafsir by Shaykh al-Tusi, states that this verse proves the obligation of helping the oppressed believers, regardless of their location and status, especially in matters of religion. So now maybe some of you are thinking that, how did we move from supplication to jihad, defensive or otherwise? And that is the key point. We have learned that supplication is a weapon that God has given to the believer. It provides an armor, a protection, and a means to defend oneself and one's family against the machinations of both Taghut and Satan. But worse still, it can also defend the more powerful aspect of it is that it can defend against something worse than both Shaitan and Taghut, which is the schemes and plots of the carnal self. And it provides a means for someone to stay in constant communication with the most beloved, with God, with the one who both loves and knows us more than any other. Therefore, when looking at matters in this temporal realm, we can also connect them to supplication, to our constant dialogue with God, to constantly calling out to God. So now we're going to try and look at maybe some practical methods to encourage supplication for this brother that we have who is very upset. Please give me a salawat and we'll continue.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وجل.
So given that the righteous Islamic scholars have taught us, and indeed Quran teaches us, that we must help our brother and sister, then we have to work with them to encourage them, to convince them to call upon God. For He is the only one who can alleviate all of these problems that this poor person has. If such a brother or sister is refusing to make dua, or he feels refusing to supplicate, refusing to talk to God, or he feels a lack of motivation, then we ourselves, first and foremost, should and can pray for his guidance or her guidance. We can perhaps, if possible, if it's practical, if it's feasible, visit them, talk with them, maybe be a means for them to, if you like, as we say colloquially, vent. We can be like the well that Imam Ali had for them, to let them let out their pain, and be someone who listens to them without judgment, without looking down at them, without interfering, without causing them, more pain or telling them, oh, you're silly or whatever. Just listen to them with compassion. We should be a compassionate friend, and this will have a profound influence on them. And this too can be a means of us encouraging them to talk to God. Perhaps we could turn around and tell them something like, My dear brother, my dear sister, you've let your pain out at me. You've poured your heart out. However, I'm a nobody. I can't really affect any change, nor can I resolve your issue. However, I know someone who can resolve your issue. And if you pour your heart out to him, be certain he will listen and he will reply. Now, while this may not have an immediate impact, it will have an impact at some point because you've planted the seed and you've attempted to refocus your brother or sister at a time when they need real help and real support. You've tried to refocus them towards God, the only one who can actually help them. This is one piece of what is meant by encouraging others to supplicate, to call upon God, to speak to God, to build and develop their relationship with God. So in this session, and I'm trying to keep these Saturday sessions a little bit shorter, both because it makes things easier for me in the preparation, but also because we want to focus on very discrete points. So in this session, we've learned how important it is to both encourage ourselves and others to supplicate, to call upon God, to indeed worship God, to love God. God willing, in the coming session, the next session, we will look at why sometimes it appears that a person sits and makes dua to God, he prays to God, he supplicates to God, a person calls to God and asks for a need that he or she deems to be vital, yet God appears to not be responding. We will understand this, God willing, in multiple ways, and we will understand that while sometimes it may seem that God is not responding, but that in his apparent not responding, this itself is a response. We ask God to grant us tawfiq, the ability the wherewithal, the understanding to be able to open up to him, to bare our proverbial souls to him, to befriend him, to love him, and to have that certainty that truly he only has our best interests at mind. We're now going to have a whispered supplication about gratitude and for good outcomes. Again, this is a supplication and munajat that I have scribed. Like I had said last week, every session will have a dua that has been manually scribed as an inspiration, as an evidence that anyone can sit and write a dua. Anyone can write a sonnet, a love poem, anything to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is something that we should all try and do ourselves as it develops our relationship. But for now, wa akhir da'wani alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Please give me a salawat and I will play the video.
In your name, the most gentle, the most generous, the most loving, O my Master, my shelter in distress and my hope in desolation, I praise you with the tongue that you created and thank you with a heart that you revived by your remembrance. You covered my faults before I was even capable of repentance, and you shaped my story with wisdom before I knew to ask for guidance. So how can I not thank you when every breath I take is laced with your mercy? O Lord, if you had taken me to account for my sins, I would have perished, but instead you veiled me and led me gently to your door. My past is shameful, but my hope is vast, for you are the one who turns ruin into redemption. O knower of the unseen ends, make my final steps better than my first. Let my tongue speak truth when I am tested. Let my heart remain steadfast when I am forgotten by the world. Make me grateful in ease, patient in hardship, and surrendered in every decree. For you know what I do not, and you choose what I would not have dared to ask. O most gentle, seal my life with your pleasure, and awaken me in the next world to your nearness. For nothing would delight the thankful more than to be near the one they thank. And send your endless blessings upon Muhammad, your beloved and chosen, the lantern of guidance and the seal of your mercy, and upon his pure and righteous family, those whom you made the vessels of your knowledge and the ark of salvation. Through them let my supplication rise, and through them let my end be good. Ameen, O Lord, sustainer of the worlds. Ameen, O most merciful of the merciful.